expressed on the following program are those of the host and not necessarily those of staff, management, or ownership.
Phoenix! Brother Mike is back on the radio. HardcoreChristianity.com. Thank you for your time. God bless you today. Welcome to the program. Today's Bible study. Whoa! Smoking in the boys' room. Hey, would you give somebody a call right now and tell them the radio program's on? I'll do a couple of announcements while you're making that call. I'll give you a second before I start. This is Brother Mike. I'm the professional counselor at the House of Healing, 34 plus years of it. On the radio since 2002. On the website, HardcoreChristianity.com, has all of our services, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Tuesday night is our deliverance training class. I do that one, 7 p.m. Friday night's my teaching for my radio listeners, 6:30 p.m. Wednesday night, Inner Healing Night with Diane and Kelly. They'll lead you through to inner healing from your child abuse and your childhood trauma. Thursday night, we got the preachers there, preaching, healing, deliverance, 4 services a week. Hit the PayPal button when you call. Go to the website and send us another donation. You've been doing it for years now. Thank you. We have never been late on a radio payment because of you. Our free seminar, you can sign up for that on the website. That's on July 29th. YouTube teaching channel, Facebook page, everything's on the website. Ready for you. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can get the radio programs on soundcloud.com/hardcore-Christianity. The government is moving in on us, folks. I'm telling you, the end can't be that far away. It really can't. The rise of the false prophet and the Antichrist are going to be here very shortly. Within a few years, this thing's going to end. We're at the very end of the dispensation of grace, and sin is abounding everywhere. Check this out. A few weeks ago, you already got this notice, but let me explain to you a little bit more information in depth on what's happening here. Check this article out from Washington, D.C. It was put out by the federal government, the Department of Education. Quote, the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education released on Friday guidelines for schools nationwide. These guidelines outline the Obama administration now requires schools to allow students to use the restroom and locker rooms corresponding with their gender identity under threat of losing their federal funding. Now, everybody knows that happened, and that happened a few weeks ago, but not everybody knows the rest of this thing. Check this out. Quote, there's no room in our schools for discrimination of any kind, including discrimination against transgender students and on the basis of their sex, said Attorney General Loretta Lynch in a statement announcing the release of the guidelines. Quote, this guidance gives administrators, teachers, and parents the tools they need to protect transgendered students from peer harassment and to identify and address unjust school policies. The 8-page document outlines that the government interprets Title IX of the Educational Amendments of 1972 as applying to those who identify as transgendered. Now you see what they're doing. In 1972, gender in Title IX had nothing to do with transgender, so they're transposing the definition upon a word used in 1972. Quote, the section which prohibits educational institutions from discriminating against a person based on their gender was generally considered applying to discrimination against women in treating females as inferior to males, including sports programs. Okay, now I'm a senior citizen. I'm in my 60s. I remember when this amendment came out and how it affected the whole country, because universities and colleges had to put in equitable sports programs for males and females, so that the schools who were basically funding the other sports programs off football and basketball, and the other sports programs of the men and women were losing money, Now they had to make it equitable. That was a big scandal back then, and it turned out okay, I guess. That's an issue for another radio show. But that was the concept back then, male and female gender, and it was during the women's lib movement. Now the government is saying the word gender also transfers to intersex, transgendered people. But look at the requirements here is really interesting. Quote, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, or be denied benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. That's another quote out of Title IX. The Justice and Education Departments consequently outlined in the document recently released that schools must allow males who identify as females and vice versa to use the restroom and locker rooms that correspond with their gender identity, or as the document defined it, listen to this, quote, their internal sense of gender, unquote. The article goes on to say, quote, a school may provide separate facilities on the basis of sex, but must allow transgendered students access to such facilities consistent with their gender identity. A school may not require transgender students to use facilities inconsistent with their gender identity or to use individual user facilities when other students are not required to do so. What are they saying there? The schools cannot put in a separate restroom for transgendered. They can't do it. They have to use the regular bathrooms and the regular locker rooms, or they will lose federal subsidies. Quote, under Title IX, there is no medical diagnosis or treatment requirement that students must meet as a prerequisite to being treated consistent with their gender identity. The Obama administration further outlined that students and their parents must simply, quote, assert a gender identity that differs from previous representations or records to administrators in order to be granted access to their preferred facility. Translation, it's 100% up to the student to simply decide, hey, I'm not this sex, I'm that one. I am intersex. I'm not sure what sex I am. I'm not sure where I fit in, but I kind of prefer this. And so the preference determines what happens. Quote, the rules also apply to housing and participation in sports program. You know what another word for housing is in college? Dorms. Dorms. Although competitive fairness in athletic programs may be taken into account in relation to the student's admission to an athletics program, translation, if you have the skills to play, you can be put on the team. So if you're transgendered and you have the skills to play, you can be put on the team. A male student can be put on the female team if he identifies transgendered femaleness. So now you're going to have males playing on the women's basketball team and vice versa, assuming they have the skills to make the team. Quote, the departments state that failure to follow these guidelines could result in the loss of federal funding. As a condition of receiving federal funds, a school agrees that it will not exclude, separate, or deny benefits to or otherwise treat differently on the basis of sex any person in its educational programs or activities unless expressly authorized to do so under Title IX. However, the article said, earlier this month, 50 families sued the U.S. Department of Justice and the Department of Education for forcing a school district to allow a male student who identifies as female to use the girls' locker room at his local high school. An attorney named Thomas for the Thomas More Society said this, quote, "It's a massive step backwards to force women to give up their inherent right to bodily privacy. To impose such a rule on still developing teenage girls as they're already struggling with puberty's changes on their bodies and social pressures to look a certain way and be a certain way undermines their dignity and tells them that their rights don't matter." This isn't a message we want to send to our girls. Can you believe it? What's really happening here? Let's uncover it and dig down to the bottom. It's Genesis chapter 1. Humanity is rebelling against God from the basics of humanity. Here's the rub. Genesis chapter 1, quote, "God said, 'Let us make man in our image.'" Salem is the Greek word for image there. It means shade. Like someone would stand in the shade and you would look, or stand in the sun, you would see the shade from their body, and it had their bodily shape on the ground. "And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, over the earth, and over every creature that creeps upon the earth." And it says, "Let us make man," us, by the way, as a reference to the Trinity there. That's a plural personal pronoun. "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Demuth is the Hebrew word in that verse, and it means shape. You and I, and every human being, were made to look like God. God has a head, a torso, 2 arms, 2 legs. He looks like us. So God created man in his own image, Genesis 1, and in the image of God created him. Male and female, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Our society is turning its back on God from the bottom end, telling us the tribulation, the rapture, the false prophet, the Antichrist, I think they're alive now somewhere in the world. The Antichrist is in the Middle East. The false prophet, we have no information about where he comes from. They're alive now, folks, and you can see from the trend in our society that the end is coming. And this thing's about to wrap up. And you have got to make major changes in your life to be ready for the rapture, because just because you're a born-again Christian doesn't guarantee you a trip in the rapture.
The views expressed on the preceding program are those of the host and not necessarily those of staff, management, or ownership. This program has been sponsored by Michael W. Smith.